I don't want to sit there and listen to other people talk. Thank you, Creative Mornings, for having me. Thanks for everyone for being here. Can we just give another round of applause to everyone who's put this together? Also, I feel very honored to be here. It's such a treat to be out in the world with people. So yes, I'm a visual artist and muralist, and I do a lot of different things, as you can see from the slide behind me. And I work in a lot of different mediums as well. And my art practice has a big focus on gender justice. And for me, it's really important to tell women's stories, and I do that through my Indo-folk feminine aesthetic. I've always liked discomfort. I've always liked taboo. That's probably why I listen to true crime. I've always just been really interested in those things people don't want to talk about. So on that note, I just want to give a content warning that I will be talking about projects that I've done that are based around men's violence against women, so please take care. So a few weeks ago, I went to the late and great P. Mansurum's show at Surrey Art Gallery on closing day, and I noticed that there were several works entitled Rear View Mirror Number, XYZ, and I was really curious about it, so I looked it up, and it's from a quote by Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan, who's in the photo there, with P. Mansurum. He was a close friend and collaborator of P. Mansurum's. And the quote reads, "We look at the present through a rear view mirror. We march backwards into the future." And that really resonated with me because much of my adult life, I looked at my present through a rear view mirror of regret and failed potential. Don't worry, it's not that depressing. But I want to take you back to little Sandeep, same fringe. And I look at this picture and I think, when we're children, we're told that we can do anything, we can achieve anything, we have no limits. And I look at this picture and I see little Sandeep with this unfettered potential, fully living in the moment. And since becoming a mother, I think about my son's potential all the time. I think about what he'll end up doing and how I can support him in that. And I kind of envy the way he lives fully in the present moment. He has no baggage from the past. He has no concept of time, no concept of the future. And he's just fully living in the here and the now. And, as adults, we don't do that. We're so stuck in the past, or we're so anxious and worried about the future that we forget about the now, we forget about the present. And so, my parents came to Canada in the 70s. Typical immigrant story, came to Canada for a better life for their children, for themselves, and that included these 5 pre-approved professions that teen Sandeep was having none of. I'm in the denim jacket above, just kind of sitting there like this in physics class. And so that unfettered potential of mine from when I was a child, it turned into pressure, and that pressure was intensified by this cultural expectation, these familial obligations, and the sort of gendered restrictions that I grew up under. And in my heart, I always knew I was an artist, and I always knew I wanted to pursue it, but it just felt like such an abstract concept because I didn't know any South Asian person that was making art. And I grew up pre-internet as well, so I didn't have access to social media to be like, ooh, someone's doing this over there. So I really didn't know how to pursue it and if it was something that I could pursue, but it was always in me. And so when I was a student, I was very intrinsically motivated. I was a super overachiever. And in grade 7 and grade 12, I won the Most Outstanding Student Award. And this is a picture of me in grade 12 giving the valedictorian speech. I was also student council co-president. I was captain of the basketball team, and I was a straight-A student. And so you might be wondering why I'm telling you this. Is it to impress you? No. Although it is impressive. But I'm telling you this because after high school, I became an underachieving, not motivated person at all. I just had no direction and I had no interest in what I was doing. So cue failed potential. Because I wasn't doing anything that was aligning with my heart and my purpose. And so I did a biology degree with no intention of becoming a doctor. And after that, I did an education degree with no intention of, well, maybe an intention of becoming a teacher. But I still felt really aimless, I felt really unfulfilled. And while I was doing both of those degrees, my instructors told me I was in the wrong faculty. And I was like, well, what do you mean? What faculty should I be in? They're like, well, obviously arts. And so I was like, oh, and again, it was just so how do I do this? But I did nothing. And then 5 years later, at 30, I went to art school. It was one of those like now or never moments. I was thinking forward to like my future deathbed regrets. And I bit the bullet, I signed up, went to school. And I entered as a mature student in theory, but obviously not in practice, as you can see from this photo. But it was the first time I felt present in a really long time. I was doing something that I loved, and I was working with my hands, and everything was so tactile and so challenging and so interesting. And I came back to myself. I became that intrinsically motivated person again. I became that high achiever that I was so long ago. I had an A+ average at art school, and I won the design award. And so it felt like, oh, I'm that person again. Like, I'm finally there. And so I was like, I'm going to be an artist. And I crashed and burned. There were no professional practice classes at that time, so you study art, you learn some foundational skills, you create some bodies of work, and then you're released into the wild, and you have no idea what it all entails. And so I didn't know how to network, I didn't know how to market my work, I didn't know how to run a business, I didn't even know that being an artist was a business. So I got a real job in 2008, and then I met my husband around that time as well. And a few years into our marriage, he encouraged me to start making art again, because I wasn't really making anything, and I was really, again, unfulfilled and unhappy in my job. So this is really how I was feeling at the time. This is a quote, part of a quote by Brené Brown, and I really love it. It's, "Unused creativity is not benign. It metastasizes, it turns into grief, rage, judgment, sorrow, shame." And that's how I was feeling. I just felt like, is this my life? Like, is this it? Like, I just go to this 9-to-5 job and I don't do anything else and I don't accomplish anything? And it was really, like, I think I was really starting to spiral. And the feeling just got more acute as time ticked on. And so I started very casually making art, and it wasn't very good, or it wasn't very interesting, but at least I was doing it again, and it was very tactile, and I was using that, creative energy. And then we found out we're having a baby. So this is a photo from a few years ago, but I had my son a few months shy of my 40th birthday. And again, there was that sense of urgency, like, I just had a kid in the nick of time, and now what? I have to do this art thing. And I was also, because I'm kind of a macabre person, I was like, well, I'm halfway to death. So time is running out, I need to get moving. So it was now or never. I keep going back to these now or never moments. And this was 10 years after I went to art school. So it seemed like every decade I had this moment where it was like now or never. And so I officially left my job, and I was going to try my hand at becoming a professional artist. And I had to work through so much fear and so much self-doubt. Fortunately, my husband really believed in me, and so I needed that belief. I needed that person to believe in me, to give me permission to believe in myself. But I do want to recognize my privilege at that time. I did have paid maternity leave for 1 year. I was also granted an additional 6 months unpaid leave of absence to see if we could actually live on one income. And I have a very supportive husband. So all of those work together to really support me in moving forward at this time. And so then I was like, well, I guess I'm an artist now. So now what? And the first thing I had to think about was finding my conceptual voice. And I was like, well, what's my why? What am I going to make art about, and why should people even care about my art? There's so many people out there, especially with social media. You feel like there's just so many artists out there, like, well, who would care about my art? And like, what do I have to say? And why would someone want to listen to me? So when I was growing up, I felt a lot of anger around gender injustice that I saw in my home, in my community. I saw the different ways that men and women were being treated, and I didn't understand why that disparity existed. And I would constantly question my parents, and they were like, well, it's just the way it is. And I'm like, yeah, but why is it this way? Like, give me some answers. And they couldn't give me those answers, because I don't think they even knew, because it was just the way it was. And I didn't like that when I spoke out, my voice wasn't heard, and I felt like I was silenced. And I'm not the kind of person that can be silenced. So I thought, well, maybe now is the time to use my voice constructively and to turn that anger around these things that I care about into something constructive that could have an impact greater than myself, an impact that can extend greater, like beyond my community, and potentially help people. And so the second thing I had to think about was finding my visual voice, and I was like, well, how will I talk about these things, and how will I talk about it in this sort of symbolic, visual way? And when I was younger, I grew up in a town that was very small and not very diverse. There was a very small South Asian population. And, you know, I think it's true in a lot of cases of kids of immigrant parents. You kind of turn your back on your culture and you just kind of want to conform and be like your friends. And as an adult now, I feel so ashamed of that, but that was something I had to go through to get to where I am now. So in finding my voice, it was really important to include the aesthetics of my heritage. And as an adult, I feel so proud to be South Asian, and I've been connecting with the South Asian community in ways that I'd never imagined. And so it's important to me that when people see my work, they know that it's made by a South Asian hand. Like, that is just such a huge part of my practice. And I want South Asian folks, when they see my work, to feel a sense of kinship and a sense of connection, because this is for them. This is for all of you. But I really want to, in a sense, I guess, pay homage to my upbringing and my cultural heritage. And so to develop my visual vocab, I spent about a year just drawing every night, and I started noticing like repetitive elements showing up, certain symbols and motifs and colors, and those ended up forming the basis of my practice and my style. Because people always ask me, like, how did you develop your style? And you really have to make a concerted effort to hone in on that voice, and that voice is really important because that's what people recognize when they see your work out in the world. So I wanted to talk about a few of my projects that have been very meaningful to me. It was really hard to choose, but I narrowed it down to 6. This was my first solo show, Rest in Power, in 2017 at the Grand Gallery, and it was dedicated to 12 women whose senseless and very tragic murders had really impacted me. And they died through domestic abuse, honor killing, and femicide. And I remember when I was talking about the work, I would say, 12 women who died. And I was like, well, actually they didn't die, they were murdered. And so I was like, that distinction in language is so important. And, when we talk about violence against women, well, who is perpetuating this violence? Because there's no subject in that. And Jackson Katz, an educator, talks about that. He's like, why are we taking the subject out of this statement? He's like, we have to add the subject to the statement because it's not something that's just randomly happening to women. There are people who are perpetuating this violence against women. And so I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to talk about women who are South Asian, but I didn't just want to focus on the South Asian community because this is obviously a global issue. And so I also spoke about women from other countries and other cultures. And I really wanted to take these stories from the past, some from the very recent past, and give them significance in the present moment. Because I wanted these women's memories and legacies to be alive, to stay alive. I wanted people to remember their names and remember their faces and remember their stories. And this drawing up here, the ink and collage drawing, that is dedicated to Jaswinder Sidhu from Maple Ridge. I don't know if you've heard of her, but probably. But long story short, she was executed in India in 2000 on the command of her mother and uncle for marrying what they deemed was a low-caste man who was a rickshaw driver, instead of having an arranged marriage to a business associate who was much older. And it's the idea of honor and how women's actions, the social actions of a woman, define the honor of a family. And so in their eyes, she had dishonored them in front of their community. And I felt really attached to her story, and I didn't know if it was because it was so hyper-local or because she was the same age as me, and she passed away when she was 25. And when I was 25, I just moved back from Japan. I started my education degree, I think. And I went on to get married, I went on to have a kid, and she never had that chance. She didn't have those opportunities. And so something very serendipitous happened on the opening night of my show. It opened September 8th, 2017. My first solo show. I'm super excited about it, but also very nervous about releasing this very personal show to the public. And wondering how people would respond and react. But that night, her mom and uncle were finally being extradited to India to face charges 17 years later, and it was happening on the opening night of my show. And I was like, oh, this is so wild, like, and here she is in my show. Unfortunately, their lawyer was able to halt their extradition when they reached Toronto that same day, but they did end up being extradited 2 years later. And so at the show, it was really interesting to see how people responded, and people were very moved, and people wanted to know more about these women. And I only had their names and a quote by a loved one because I wanted people to want to be curious, to want to learn more about these women, and to go home and research it themselves. I like talking about difficult topics, but I don't want to hit anyone over the head with it. I just want to present the information, I want to present it in a beautifully aesthetic way, and then I want you to go home and take what you can from the show and maybe do some more research and learn about these women. And then this is still my favorite mural. It's at Granville Island. I did it in 2018 as part of Art Smash, facilitated through Van Mural Fest. And I was painting this actually at the height of the Me Too movement, founded by Tarana Burke, but popularized by Hollywood. And so this mural really speaks to me of what was going on at that point in time socially, that moment of now. And I just felt so disgusted by the stories coming out. I started reading more about Tarana Burke and her work with, brown and black kids who are going through really abusive situations. And I was thinking a lot about how women are conditioned to be small, to be compliant, to be quiet. That was the expectation of me growing up, and so I don't think people knew what to do with me because I was certainly not that kind of person. And so I thought this piece was going to be about speaking up and speaking out, but I realized as I was painting it that I wanted to combat that, staying small by painting this really large-scale woman and have her take up as much physical space as possible. And maybe that would encourage women who walk by and see it to take up physical space in their everyday lives. This is another mural I did back in 2019. I'm going to do a shameless plug. I have a mural in the lobby of the Vancouver Art Gallery up until October. Please go see it. So in 2019, my career was really taking off. I was, hashtag booked and blessed. And I was really like, oh wow, I have a lot to do. And so I was just in this work mode, like, I've got to get this done, I've got to get this done. And so I had this opportunity with Vancouver Art Gallery and Indian Summer Festival to paint the 4 niches in the 3rd floor rotunda. And 2 years into my career, it's kind of a big deal, but I never think anything is a big deal, which is probably why it keeps me really grounded and humble. But I was told that no one had ever muraled that space before, so I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And then I was told that I was the first artist to cross over from art rental and sales in the Vancouver Art Gallery to curatorial. I was like, that's pretty cool. But I wasn't really living in that present moment and acknowledging like how cool that really was, because I was on this constant like now what loop, and it was like now what, now what, now what, now what, and I wasn't present. I wasn't looking at my accomplishments and being like, wow, I did this. Like, this is really cool. Pat on the back. So my friend had to grab me by the shoulders and look me in the eyes, and she was like, Sandeep, this is a big deal. She's like, stop, take a moment, acknowledge this. And I think that's something I really want you to take away from this, is whatever accomplishments you have or you've made, take a moment and just celebrate them, however big or however small. But it's really important to like give yourself that grace and that credit and be like, I did this, and this is really great, and I'm going to celebrate myself. So this was another project that was really, really special to me. Stories for South Asian Supergirls, available at bookstores. I was one of 10 South Asian female illustrators for this groundbreaking book. It consists of 50 profiles of South Asian female trailblazers, pioneers, rebels, role models. And so again, I grew up pre-internet, and I didn't have access to any books like this growing up. I didn't have access to books with characters that look like me. I didn't really hear about women's accomplishments in my home. I didn't hear about women's accomplishments in the South Asian community. And even, community at large, like we weren't and maybe still aren't celebrating women's accomplishments. And I always wonder, like, if I'd had these types of fearless role models, would I have had the confidence to pursue my art at an earlier age? I don't know. But what's really exciting about this is now I get to be that role model for the younger generation of South Asian girls, and they can carry on and carry on and carry on, and this book is the beginning of something really beautiful. And this project is one that was really very close to my heart. This is called For Jyothi, and it's in honor of Jyothi Singh, which most of you probably know about her, but she was brutally assaulted in Delhi in 2012 and died of her injuries. And so her murder just sparked national and international outrage, like unprecedented. There was so much anger around what had happened to her and how it had happened and how we as a society, we let these things keep happening. And over on the other side of the world, here I am as part of the South Asian diaspora, and I'm feeling just such a deep sense of rage, but also this like deep sense of hopelessness, like, will this ever change? And then I'm like really mad about it, and then I'm like, we can change this, then I'm really mad about it, and I just keep going between those two feelings. And so I wanted to create something to honor her, but I didn't really know what, and I didn't know how to kind of work through my feelings of anger to create something that would really do her justice and her story justice. And I never ever want to share someone's story through a lens of anger. I always want to share it through a lens of beauty. And so 7 years later, I was invited by Broad Arts Foundation to create an animation, thanks to Bambi Edlin, amazing animator. And it was projected onto the facade of the Vancouver Art Gallery for Facade Festival. And one of the women from BAF was like, Sandeep, we really love your gender justice work. Feel free to create an animation around that. And so I was like, this is it. Like, this is the time. This is the right time. This is the right public platform. I get to tell her story, and I get to tell it in this very grand public way to do it justice. And this scene right here is actually depicting the attack, and I was like, how do I depict such a horrific thing in a visual way? And so I chose to just have hands come up and cover her body. The woman with the candle is her mother Asha, and for the last decade she has advocated tirelessly for justice for her daughter, and she got justice. So I just felt so proud of this woman for fighting for her daughter. And so I spent all this time telling stories around other women. I like telling stories around women's suffering because there's so much resilience in it and there's so much resistance in it, and that's what interests me. And I thought, well, maybe it's time I tell my own story, and I turned the lens inward. And so I had a residency at BAF last year for 10 weeks, and I decided to tell my own story around motherhood for the first time, and also work with textiles for the first time. And like, when I had my son, you never know what to expect when you have a child. Everyone's like, oh, it's the best, oh, it's amazing, you're gonna love it. And then you realize that is so far from the reality of it. Of course I love him so much, if you're listening, Safa. But my life is so much better with him in it, but we don't talk about the hard stuff. So when my son went to kindergarten, I finally had that time and I had that space to think about it and talk about it and create something around it. So I wanted to talk about the dark side of motherhood, the stuff that, moms just sit in these silos and they suffer in silence, and they're too scared to tell people how they're feeling because they're like, oh, people are gonna judge me, and then they're gonna think I'm a bad mom, and completely forget that we're human. And so I wanted to explore the unrealistic expectations of maternal perfection in a society that demands it, but offers little support when we inevitably fall short of those expectations. We are set up for failure. And being a parent it's obviously very hard. Being a mother is very hard, especially in this age of relentless scrutiny. People are constantly watching. People are constantly giving unsolicited advice. People are constantly telling you that you're doing a bad job. And so I wanted to have this conversation, and I wanted to talk about these darker feelings. So I created these 3 pairings. The beasts are about 8 feet tall. They're 2D, flat against the wall. and they represent me, the dark beast mother. And the little, Sappho always reminds me of a monkey, so the little monkey is like a plush toy. I stuffed him to kind of be reminiscent of a children's stuffy, and he's these like beautiful bright golds and blues. And you're seeing these relationships between the beast mother and the child. And each pairing represents an intense feeling or emotion I felt in early motherhood, and then also, trickling, through the years. So obviously you can see that the one with the beast's arms out, that's rage. I didn't know mom rage was a thing, but apparently it is. So I feel a bit justified. The middle one is emotional immaturity, and for me that was the most surprising one of all, because I always thought I had a pretty good EQ, but when I became a mother, I realized that I was actually quite immature in my emotions. And sometimes I just was so paralyzed to the point that I just couldn't cope with what was happening, and Sappho would have to carry me. He would have to be the parent in that moment. And the other one is like that sadness and that loneliness when you just feel like you're so alone and you feel so isolated and you don't really know what you're doing, but you're too scared to ask for help. And so I started by writing all of the feelings onto the wall in my studio on Post-its, and I thought, oh God, if anyone sees these, they're gonna think I'm a horrible mother. And so I almost took them down, and then I was like, no, but that's the point of the show. So I ended up actually putting them in the show. So I had an installation on the other wall from the studio, and I put all the Post-its up on the wall for the world to see. And I think that's what people really connected with the most. So this show was very cathartic for me, but people connected with it, and there was a sort of collective sigh of relief. Like, oh, we have a space where we can talk about this freely and safely, and no one is going to judge us. And that was my hope with the show, especially with the response and getting messages from people thanking me for talking about this because they were so scared to talk about it. And for me, that is the beauty of art and the beauty of my art practice, is I get to take these really scary topics or these really taboo topics, and I get to turn them into something beautiful, and something beautiful that people can connect with. So this is my last slide, and this is a photo of me in 2016 as this very tired new mom who was teetering on the edge of insanity. And in 2016 it was, can I do this? 6 years later it's like, holy shit, I did this! So in the last 6 years I've gone from, this real place of insecurity, self-doubt, fear, to this place of like, wow, like, I have something to offer the world, and people are giving me opportunities so that I can do that, and this is amazing, and I feel grateful every single day that I get to do this. And I found myself again. I found that intrinsically motivated overachiever, and I've always been that person, but it's when I'm doing my art that I come alive, and I wouldn't change it for anything. And so in the last 6 years, like, I've worked with the Vancouver Art Gallery and Brard Arts Foundation, Surrey Art Gallery, Van Mural Fest, Indian Summer Festival, Vancouver Whitecaps, Holt Renfrew, Lululemon, Earl's Restaurant, all of these great organizations, and I still am like, wow, I did that. I was making these weird geometric paintings that, like, who cares? And now I'm actually making work that matters. This is really cool. So now, instead of looking at my present through a rearview mirror filled with regret and failed potential, I look at how much I've accomplished over the past 6 years, and I'm walking forward into the future instead of backwards. And that has been such a huge thing for me. But before I end, I do want to thank a few people who, without them, I don't think I could have done this, and I don't think I would be here doing this. And obviously my husband, Chris, for his unwavering support. My dear friend Jamie Smith, founder of Thrive Art Studio. My friend Chris Yarsno introduced me to Jamie. And meeting Jamie changed my whole world. She taught me about the business side of art. She taught me about my art practice. Through Jamie, I met my art consultant, Penny Lane Shen, of Dazed and Confucius Art Consulting. I've worked with her for the past 6 years, and she has helped me make my practice better and stronger and more interesting. David Vertesi, the former co-founder of Van Mural Fest, he gave me my first public wall and kind of inadvertently launched my mural career. So I think showing gratitude and really giving props to the people who help you is really important, because we can't go at it alone, and we shouldn't have to go at it alone. but we have to make sure that we are building community in this process and that we are supporting others the way they're supporting us. And then I just want to thank the Creative Mornings team, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. So thank you.
Alrighty, and now we might have time for a question or two. If you'd like to come back up here, Sandy.
My favorite part.
Let's see. Okay, I need a mic. We don't have the mics today. All right, we're gonna do a loud shout for these questions because we don't have a second mic. Go ahead.
Thank you, and happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
So, I'm Shiraz Ramji. I create grandparents on a festival. So hope your child can look at the picture books with grandparents and movie. My question is about, you had snake in your drawing. What does it symbolize? And what was the impact of Bollywood films? Because I was born in Africa, and Bollywood taught me a lot of Hindi through songs, and there was a lot of artwork. So when you grew up, did any of the Bollywood artwork affect your admiration? Because Bollywood also promotes love, but then hides the violence.
Yeah.
Because I think India is one of the countries which promotes so much love poetry that it really hypnotizes people again about violence.
Yeah, no, I did watch Bollywood films growing up. Not so much as an adult, but I always love the aesthetic of Bollywood posters. I love the way that they're hand painted, and I love the sort of graphic typeset. The snakes, I just started drawing them, and now because they drive my mom so crazy, I just keep drawing them. But then I had to think about, well, why do I draw them? And I think I like that idea of how snakes are constantly shedding their skin and they're constantly transforming, because that is what life is. We're constantly shedding old parts of ourselves and transforming and starting anew, and it's just this cycle that keeps continuing.
Thank you.
Okay. So deep.
Anybody else have a question? Oh. We have a mic now too.
Hi, thank you for your amazing presentation, beautiful, powerful work. My question is, how did the pandemic affect your work, especially when it comes to the gender justice issues?
That's a good question. Yeah, when it happened, my first thought was, oh, am I going to have any work over the next little while? And so I was very worried about that, being self-employed. I've been so busy over the pandemic. I've had so many projects, which is amazing. But the thing around gender justice is thinking about the sort of byproduct of lockdowns, where you're hearing stories of women being trapped in their homes with abusive partners and the rise of abuse. And so that was something that I started reading more about. And, you know, I think it's just, everything is so connected. When you do one thing, something else happens. And so we really have to make sure that when we are implementing some kind of policy or something like that, that we're making sure people are safe in other ways.
I think we have time for one last question. Anybody has one?
Ask me anything. I love questions.
What's next, Sandeep?
Oh, God.
What are you doing? Give us a pitch.
Yeah. Yeah, oh God. Yeah, I've been actually really thinking about my career a lot lately, and you know, I'm in my 6th year, and I'm trying to think about like what projects serve me, what projects don't, where I want to go and how I want to expand. And it really takes a lot of mental power to think about what you want your business and practice to look like and how you can get there. So I think right now I'm just, besides the projects, I'm just trying to think about how I'm going to implement change as my business grows and what other avenues I want to explore, because there's other things I want to do, and I need time. I need like 50 hours in a day to be able to do this. So yeah, I just think it's really important as artists that we keep evolving and we try new things and we try different mediums, and also that idea of thinking big and dreaming big, because there is that starving artist myth that has been around forever, and I think artists start feeling that, thinking, oh, well, can I make money doing this? Can I actually be successful? And the answer is yes, you can. It requires a lot of work and a lot of boundaries, but it's absolutely possible. And so I think it's really important for artists to think about what kind of projects serve them and make sure that they get paid to do them. Yeah.
Well, let's give one more round of applause.